Welcome to TB Dahl Audiobooks. Before the story begins, please take a quick second to subscribe and leave a comment below. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, enjoy the listen. This is an audiobook, Chapter 4, Part 2. Undisclosed Background. Author, TB Dahl. Chapter 4, The Escape, continued.
The smell hit him first. Wet concrete, diesel exhaust, metal shavings, and the particular chalky dust that hung in the air around active formwork. The sounds closed in, the pile driver louder now, a radio playing Norwegian pop from one of the lower levels, voices calling in a mix of Norwegian, Polish, and Lithuanian. His world. The place where his body knew every surface, every route, every rhythm. He moved fast but didn't run. Running on a construction site drew eyes. He walked with purpose along the temporary roadway that connected the northern access to the main work areas, head down, shoulders set, the posture of a foreman heading somewhere specific. The site office was a double-wide porta-cabin elevated on blocks near the eastern fence. He climbed the metal steps, badged the door, and stepped inside. Empty. The shift supervisor was out on the floor. Coffee cups on the desk, a laminated safety checklist pinned to the wall, the whiteboard showing tomorrow's concrete pour schedule in Lars's cramped handwriting. Elliot went to his locker, spun the combination, took out his site notebook and shoved it into his back pocket. Then he looked at the row of hooks beside the lockers where spare PPE hung for visitors and inspectors. Hard hats, fluorescent vests, waterproof jackets. He pulled down a high-vis vest, yellow, reflective strips across the chest and back, and put it on over his jacket, added a white hard hat, found a pair of work gloves on the bench and pulled them on. He checked himself in the small mirror above the hand wash station. The transformation was simple and total. From 40 meters, he was indistinguishable from any of the 200 workers on this site. The vest killed his silhouette. The hard hat hid his hair, shadowed his face. The gloves covered his hands. He was no longer Elliot Harper, the man who'd received an envelope and found a body and was now being followed through Bjorvika. He was a worker, anonymous, interchangeable, one of the crew. He stepped back outside and pulled the door shut behind him. The site spread south in a grid of temporary roads, rebar stacks, formwork panels, and half-finished floor plates. The main structure rose 8 floors so far, wrapped in scaffolding and weather screens. Cranes swung loads of steel above. Forklifts shuttled between material stores. Workers in identical vests moved in streams dictated by task schedules and safety zones. Elliot joined the nearest stream, walked south along the main hall road toward the scaffolding access on the building's east face. He kept his head angled down, face toward his chest, the hard hat's brim cutting his profile. He carried himself like a man who'd done this walk 500 times, because he had. At the scaffolding access, he took the stairs. Steel mesh treads bolted to a framework of aluminum standards and ledgers, the kind of scaffold that his company erected on every major project, the kind he'd inspected weekly since he started this job. He climbed past the second floor, the third, the fourth. His boots rang on the treads in the familiar cadence. At the 5th floor platform, he stopped. The scaffold here wrapped the building's eastern face in a continuous working deck, 3 meters wide, protected by guardrails and tow boards. Weather screens, translucent polyethylene sheets, hung from the outer edge, filtering the rain and blurring the view from outside while leaving reasonable visibility from within. Elliot stood behind the sheeting and looked down. The site spread beneath him in a map he could read with his eyes closed. The northern fence, the porta-cabins, the gap in the hoarding where he'd entered, the main gate to the east, the material laydown area to the south, the tower cranes, the haul roads, the workers, and 2 men who were not workers. The first was the man from the promenade. He stood just inside the main gate now, near the security booth. He hadn't badged in, Elliot could tell from his position, slightly off the access road, standing where visitors gathered when they waited for escorts. He was speaking to the security guard, asking something. The guard shook his head. The man stepped back, stayed by the gate. The second man was new. He was already inside the site, moving along the Hall Road from the south. Younger, heavier build. He wore a dark blue jacket that wasn't site gear and no hard hat. A forklift driver gave him a wide look as it passed. The man ignored it. He walked with controlled purpose, checking the porta-cabins, the parking area, the scaffolding accesses. Searching. 2 men. Coordinated positions. One at the gate to block the exit, one inside to sweep the site. Elliot watched the second man reach the site office and try the door. Locked. It had auto-locked behind Elliot. The man cupped his hands against the window, peered inside, then moved on. He headed toward the material store, a large temporary structure made of shipping containers and steel-framed shelving. Elliot calculated. The man at the gate covered the eastern exit. The second man was working south. Neither had spotted him on the scaffolding. The weather screens and the height made that unlikely unless they looked up with focus and purpose. But the site wasn't infinite. They'd check the scaffolding eventually. And if more men arrived, they'd narrow the gaps. He needed to move. But not down, not yet. He looked south from his position. The scaffolding continued around the building's southern face, where the structure adjoined a lower section of the development, a 3-story retail podium still in the early framing stage. Beyond the podium, a second perimeter fence separated the site from a service road that ran parallel to Dronning Euphemia's gate. There was a pedestrian gate in that fence, used by the evening cleaning crew. He'd walked through it last Thursday. Between here and there, 100 meters of scaffold deck, a ladder transition to the podium roof, and a short drop to the service road side of the fence. But first, he needed the second man to stop moving. Elliot crossed the 5th-floor platform to the building's southeastern corner. Below him, the hall road passed a laydown area where ventilation ductwork was stacked in bundled rows 3 meters high. The stacks leaned against temporary bracing, steel angle irons bolted to concrete anchor blocks. The bracing was adequate for static loads, marginal for anything that introduced a lateral force. He'd flagged it in last week's safety walk, told the subcontractor to improve the restraints. They hadn't. The second man was 40 meters from the ductwork stacks, moving north. In 2 minutes, he'd passed directly beneath the scaffolding. Elliot climbed down 2 levels to the 3rd-floor deck, where the scaffold's inner edge connected to the building's unfinished floor plate through temporary access bridges, plywood sheets spanning the gap between scaffold and slab edge. He crossed one. The building's interior was raw concrete, rebar stubs, and temporary lighting strung on orange cables. He moved to the southern face and found what he was looking for: a vertical pipe chase, an opening in the floor slab where service risers would eventually run. The chase was covered by a plywood sheet weighted down with concrete blocks. He pushed the blocks aside, looked down. The chase dropped through the 2nd floor and connected to the ground floor slab, where the ductwork laydown area began just outside the building's footprint. The bracing on the ductwork stacks was visible from here. A single row of angle irons held the nearest stack upright. The angle irons were connected to the anchor blocks by threaded rods with nuts hand-tightened, not torqued. A hard impact on the upper third of the stack would break the friction hold and let the whole bundle slide. Elliot looked around the floor plate, found a length of scaffold tube, a loose standard about 2 meters long, 5 kilograms of steel, left behind by the scaffolders after last week's modification. He carried it to the pipe chase, estimated the angle.
The ductwork stack was 8 meters away horizontally and 3 meters below. He couldn't throw a scaffold tube with enough accuracy to hit the bracing directly, but he didn't need to. He needed the stack itself. The top bundle in the nearest stack sat at the same height as his current position. A 2-meter section of galvanized ductwork, circular, 600 millimeters diameter. Heavy, but rollable. If the stack's restraint failed, the top bundle would slide first, and gravity would chain react the rest. Elliot braced the scaffold tube against the floor slab's edge, used it as a lever arm, extending through the pipe chase at a downward angle. The tube's end reached just past the building's outer wall, pointing toward the upper restraint on the ductwork stack, one of the angle irons connecting the top bundle to the bracing frame. He leaned into the tube, pushed. The end struck the angle iron with a dull clang. Nothing happened. He repositioned, pushed harder. The tube hit the angle iron's base, where the threaded rod connected to the anchor block. He felt the rod shift. Not much. A quarter turn of play. One more.
He drew the tube back, adjusted the angle by 2 degrees, and drove it forward. The impact transferred through the angle iron, through the threaded rod, and into the hand-tightened nut that nobody had torqued properly. The nut stripped. The angle iron kicked sideways. The top bundle shifted 6 inches, then 12. Then the weight distribution passed its tipping point, and 50 meters of galvanized ventilation ductwork began to slide. The sound was extraordinary. Metal on metal, amplified by the construction site's hard surfaces into a cascading roar that sounded like a freight train derailing inside a cathedral. The top bundle hit the haul road first. The impact jolted the remaining stacks. Bracing failed in sequence. Bundle after bundle peeled from the stack and crashed across the roadway in an expanding wave of circular steel sections, spinning, bouncing, and ringing against concrete. Shouts erupted from every direction. Workers dropped tools. A forklift reversed hard, its warning alarm shrieking. The pile driver stopped. Voices called out in 3 languages, "Vek frade!" and "Uważaj!" and a Lithuanian phrase Elliot didn't catch, but understood from the tone. From the 5th floor, it would look like a restraint failure. Because it was a restraint failure. The subcontractor hadn't torqued the nuts. Elliot had merely accelerated the inevitable. He pulled the scaffold tube back through the pipe chase and set it on the floor. Returned to the scaffold deck on the building's south face. Looked down. The haul road was chaos. Workers converged on the ductwork spill from 3 directions. The site supervisor, Lars, recognizable even from above by his orange hard hat and the way he ran with his elbows out, sprinted toward the area with a radio in his hand. Someone activated the site evacuation horn, and its 2-tone wail cut through the noise, adding a layer of urgency that would keep everyone focused on the ground level for the next 10 minutes. The second man, the one who'd been sweeping the site, had stopped. He stood at the edge of the ductwork debris, blocked by a scatter of pipe sections across his path and surrounded by workers who were now milling, pointing, and waiting for instructions. He couldn't move forward without climbing over the debris. He couldn't move laterally without pushing through a crowd of men in high-vis vests who all looked exactly like the man he was trying to find. The first man, at the gate, had turned toward the noise. His body language had shifted. No longer watching, now uncertain. The explosion of sound and activity had broken his concentration, introduced variables, made the site unpredictable. Elliot descended. He took the scaffold stairs down the building's southern face, moving at the same pace as the workers around him who were heading toward the debris or away from it. At the ground level, he stepped off the scaffold and turned south,
away from the commotion. Two electricians passed him going the other direction. One nodded. Elliot nodded back. The hard hat and vest made him invisible. He crossed the podium framing area, ducking under temporary bracing beams and stepping over rebar mats laid out for the next pour. The southern perimeter fence appeared through the rain. Chain-link panels with green privacy screening zipped to the outer face. The pedestrian gate was where he remembered it, between two fence posts, secured by a padlock that used the same code as the main gate. He punched in the 4 digits. The lock clicked open. He pushed through, pulled the gate shut behind him, and stepped onto the service road. The construction site's noise faded to a muffled roar behind him. The service road was empty. Wet tarmac. A row of wheelie bins along a building wall. A delivery van parked with its hazard lights on. Beyond the road, a grassy embankment led up to a pedestrian path running east toward Middelalderparken. Elliot walked. Steady pace. He stripped off the work gloves and pocketed them. Kept the vest and hard hat for now. They'd make him look like a construction worker heading home, which was the most unremarkable thing a person could be in Bjorvika at this hour. He climbed the embankment and reached the pedestrian path. Turned east. The path ran along the edge of the medieval park, lined with birch trees whose leaves had turned gold and were now dropping in the rain, plastering themselves to the asphalt like wet coins. He checked behind him. The service road was still empty. No one on the path within 100 meters in either direction. He kept walking. Middelalderparken opened around him in a broad green sweep. The ruins of medieval Oslo's church foundations visible as low stone walls in the grass, informational plaques marking where a city had stood 8 centuries ago. The park was mostly empty in the rain. A jogger in a reflective jacket passed, heading west, headphones in, eyes forward. An old man walked a small dog near the pond, sheltered under a red umbrella. Normal people doing normal things. Elliot found a bench beneath a birch tree and sat down, removed the hard hat, unzipped the fluorescent vest, and pulled it off, folding it into a compact bundle. He wore his own dark jacket underneath, the same one he'd put on that morning when the world still made structural sense. He stuffed the vest and hard hat under the bench, pushing them back against the seat supports where they'd look like abandoned sight gear. Someone would collect them, or the rain would ruin them. Either way, they'd served their purpose. He sat for 30 seconds, breathing, letting the adrenaline metabolize. His hands were steady, but he could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips, the telltale sign that his body had been running combat chemistry while his mind was calculating angles and distances. 2 men, coordinated, one static, one mobile. Professional spacing. No verbal communication visible, earpieces probably. They had his location before he reached the site. They were waiting, not searching. Riley's text had said coordinated surveillance. She was right. This wasn't a single agent following a subject. This was a net. He pulled out his phone. Riley's message still glowed on the screen. He typed a reply, then deleted it. Typed again, deleted again. The phone was a problem. If these people had resources, and their coordination suggested they did, then his phone was a transmitter. Not just for calls and texts, but for location data, cell tower pings, app connections. Every second it was powered on, it drew a line on a map that pointed directly to him. He couldn't turn it off permanently. He needed to reach Riley. But he could minimize exposure. He powered the phone down, removed it from his pocket, and placed it in the inside zip pocket of his jacket against his chest. He'd power it on briefly, send one message, and power it off again. But not here. He needed distance first. He stood and walked deeper into the park. The path curved north, following the line of the old medieval wall foundations, passing under a canopy of birch and alder trees whose branches interlocked above the path. The rain pattered on the leaves, creating a white noise screen that softened the city sounds. Ahead, the path opened onto a wider area, a community garden or activity space, judging by the raised beds, the information board, and the small wooden shelter where gardening tools hung on pegs. A family was packing up, parents in rain jackets loading a wagon with potting trays and bags of soil, 2 children chasing each other around the raised beds. Their bicycles leaned against the wooden shelter. 3 bicycles, 2 adult, 1 child-sized. The adults' bikes were basic city models. No lights, no locks, mud on the tires. Elliot's eyes moved to the bikes and stayed there for 3 seconds. Then he looked away, checked the path behind him. Empty. Checked the path ahead. Empty. The family loaded the last of their supplies and herded the children toward the northern exit, the adults pushing the wagon, the children running ahead. They left the bikes. Not permanently. They'd come back. 2 minutes, maybe 3, to get the wagon to their car, load it, return for the bikes. Parents don't forget bicycles. 2 minutes was enough. Elliot walked to the shelter, took the nearest adult bike, a gray single-speed with a worn leather saddle and flat handlebars. Wheeled it to the path, mounted and pushed off. The bike was heavy, and the gears didn't exist, but the tires held the wet path without slipping, and the frame was solid. He pedaled north through the park, following the path as it curved past the ruins and into the tree cover. The rain was an ally now. It emptied the paths. It gave him speed without witnesses. He took the first left fork, heading west, then doubled back east on a parallel path after 50 meters. Stopped. Listened. No footsteps, no shouts, no engines. He rode again. The park's paths were a network he'd run through on training mornings. He knew where they branched, where they dead-ended, where they spilled onto public streets. He took the route that looped past the old churchyard ruins, cut between 2 hedge lines, and emerged near the park's southern boundary, where the terrain dropped toward the Alneelva river path.
Here he stopped again, left the bike standing against a railing near a footbridge, wiped the handlebars with his sleeve. Not forensic paranoia, just instinct. Habit. Don't leave traces you don't have to leave. He crossed the footbridge on foot and followed the river path south for 200 meters until it met a road. Across the road, a low building with warm light behind its windows. Gamlebyen Community Center, according to the sign above the entrance. Through the glass, he could see movement. People in a room, chairs arranged in rows. A meeting or a class. The door was open. Elliot walked in. The foyer smelled like wet wool and cheap coffee. A woman behind a folding table looked up from a sign-in sheet. Norskkurs? Norwegian class, Tuesday evening. Ja, tack, Elliot said. Smiled. Picked up a pen and wrote a name on the sign-in sheet. Anders Berg. Then walked through the inner door into the classroom. 20 people sat in plastic chairs arranged in a horseshoe. A teacher stood at the front beside a whiteboard covered in vocabulary. The students were adults, a mix of ages, backgrounds, nationalities. Several looked up when Elliot entered. Most didn't. He took a seat in the back row, near the wall, where a window gave him a view of the parking lot and the road beyond. He sat there for 4 minutes, long enough for his breathing to settle.
long enough to scan the parking lot twice and confirm no vehicles had followed his route. Long enough for the teacher to write, "Hva gjør du I fritiden?" on the board, and for a woman in the front row to answer something about reading books. Then he stood, murmured "Unnskyld" to the man beside him, and walked back through the foyer. The woman at the table was on her phone. She didn't look up. He exited through a side door that opened onto a narrow corridor leading to a back entrance. The back entrance faced a different street than the front, one of those small architectural facts that only mattered if you needed two ways out of a building. Outside, a residential street, row houses, parked cars, a cat crossing the road with the unhurried confidence of an animal that owned the territory. No surveillance, no watchers, no man in a dark jacket adjusting his pace. Elliot powered on his phone. It took 12 seconds to boot. He opened the messaging app, found Riley's thread, typed fast. Clear. Was followed from Bjorvika. 2 men. Lost them at the site. I'm on foot, east side. Need the address. He hit send. Waited. The delivered indicator appeared. Then the red indicator. 3 dots. Riley typing. Her reply came in 9 seconds. Tara's cousin's flat. Kampen. Norderhovsgata, 12, 3rd floor. Code 4491. Key under mat by 3B. I'm already here. Elliot read it, memorized the address, memorized the code. Then he deleted the entire conversation thread, powered the phone off, and put it back in his jacket. Norderhovsgata, Kampen. He oriented himself. He was in Gamlebyen, southeast of the city center. Kampen was northeast of his position, across Grönland, up the hill. 20 minutes on foot if he took the direct route along Schweigårdsgate. 40 if he went indirect. He went indirect. The route he chose avoided main roads. He walked north through Gamlebyen's residential blocks, past the old cemetery where the headstones stood in rows like gray teeth in the rain, past the back of Oslo Hospital's annex buildings, through the underpass beneath the railway tracks that smelled of damp concrete and old urine. He emerged on the north side of the tracks in Grönland, where the neighborhood's mix of grocery shops, barber shops, and kebab restaurants was still lit and active despite the rain. He walked through Grönland without stopping, kept to the left side of the street, where the awnings provided cover and the shop windows provided reflections. No one matched his pace. No one appeared twice. At the intersection with Toyengata, he turned north. The road climbed steeply here, transitioning from the flat commercial zone of Grönland into the residential hillside of Kampen. The buildings changed character, shorter, older, more colorful. Wooden houses with small gardens. Apartment blocks from the 1890s with ornamental brickwork. Corner shops that had survived gentrification by selling things people actually needed. The rain had thinned. The air smelled of wet earth and someone's wood-burning stove. The street was quiet. A couple walked downhill on the opposite pavement, sharing an umbrella. A taxi passed, its roof light off, carrying someone home.
Elliot checked every parked car he passed, looked for occupied vehicles, for condensation on windows that would indicate someone sitting inside with the engine off, for the red glow of a phone screen behind a dashboard. Found nothing. He reached Norderhovsgata and slowed. The street was narrow and residential. Apartment buildings from the early 20th century, 3 to 4 stories, brick and plaster facades in muted yellows and grays, iron balconies with plants and drying racks, ground floor windows lit with the warm tones of kitchens and living rooms where people were eating dinner or watching television. Life happening on the other side of glass, separated from Elliot by nothing but a few centimeters of wall
and the distance between a normal Tuesday evening and whatever his evening had become. Number 12 was midway along the block, a 3-story building with a green front door and an entry panel beside it. He punched in 4491. The lock buzzed. He pushed through. The stairwell was clean and quiet. Tiled floor, wooden banister, the smell of old paint and laundry detergent. He climbed to the 3rd floor, found 3B. The door was dark wood with a brass number plate. A worn doormat sat in front of it, its edges curled. He lifted the mat's corner. A single key, silver with a blue plastic tag. He picked it up, fitted it to the lock, turned. The door opened into a dim hallway. Small apartment, he could tell from the proportions. 1 bedroom, maybe 2. Kitchen at the back, living room to the left. The lights were off except for a lamp in the living room, its glow visible around the doorframe. He stepped inside and closed the door, turned the deadbolt, checked the chain, fastened it. "It's me." Riley appeared in the living room doorway. She'd changed out of whatever she'd been wearing at the museum. Now, in a dark sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back, her face stripped of the professional composure he'd seen in their previous encounters. Not scared, not panicked, but different, tighter. Her eyes moved across him the way they'd moved across the dead man's room in the museum basement, reading, cataloging, assessing damage. "You're wet." "It's raining." She stepped back to let him into the living room. A small space. Sofa, armchair, bookshelf, a desk pushed against the window. The window's blinds were closed. Good. On the desk, Riley had arranged their materials. The silver cross, her notebook, a printout of the VG article about Rask, and 2 phones, hers and a second one he didn't recognize. "Tara's spare," Riley said, following his gaze. "Prepaid. She bought it 6 months ago for a work event and never returned it. She dropped it off before she went home." Elliot nodded. A clean device. Useful. He sat in the armchair. The cushion was soft and slightly damp from the rain his jacket carried. He didn't take the jacket off. Not yet. He wasn't ready to settle. "Tell me about the museum," he said. Riley sat on the sofa, one leg drawn underneath her, her arms folded. She told him. 2 men, gray jacket and navy parka, coordinated bracketing in the gallery, Tara's staff card, the service corridor, Jonas, the loading dock, the walk to Campen. Her delivery was precise. She organized information the way she probably organized briefings at her firm, chronological, evidence-based, conclusions separated from observations. But underneath the structure, he heard the pressure. Not in her words, in the spaces between them. The micro-pauses where she chose one word over another. The way her eyes kept returning to the closed blinds, as if checking that they were still closed. "They saw Tara," she said. "They know her face now." "Did she understand that?" "I told her. She offered the apartment anyway." Elliot let that sit. Then he told her about Bjordvika, the man on the promenade, the second man inside the site, the hard hat and vest, the ductwork, the park, the bicycle, the community center, the indirect route to Campen. Riley listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You knocked down a stack of pipes." "Ventilation ductwork. The restraints were inadequate. I've been telling the subcontractor for a week." Something flickered across her face. Not quite a smile. An acknowledgement. "How professional were they?" she asked. "The 2 at the site? Good enough. They communicated without visible signals, earpieces or prearranged positions. They covered the main exit and swept the interior simultaneously. But they weren't prepared for me to change my appearance inside the site. They expected a man in a dark jacket. They got 200 men in yellow vests. Same pattern as the museum. They bracketed my movement. They anticipated my route through the galleries. But when Tara took me off the expected path, staff corridors, service areas, they couldn't follow.
Elliot looked at the closed blinds. Through the slats, the faint orange of a street light, rain tapping the glass. They're good at following, not as good at adapting. That tells us something. It tells us they're working from a plan. Surveillance schedules, predicted routes, probably using our known patterns. Home, work, regular locations. When we deviate, they lose us. But they'll adjust. Riley unfolded her arms, reached for her notebook, opened it to a page covered in her angular handwriting. 4 confirmed watchers, she said. 2 at the museum, 2 at the construction site. All male, all in civilian clothing, all operating in pairs. No visible weapons, but that doesn't mean anything. No police identification, no approach, no contact. They wanted position, not confrontation. Surveillance, not apprehension. For now. That qualifier hung in the room like smoke. Who has this kind of capacity in Oslo? Elliot asked. If it's domestic, PST, Norwegian intelligence, or a private security firm with serious resources. If it's foreign, she paused, let the sentence complete itself. The FSB doesn't run 4-man surveillance teams in Oslo, Elliot said. They don't run them directly. They use local assets, contracted operators, people with residency, language, and plausible cover. The Russian embassy has attachés whose job descriptions don't survive close examination. And there are private firms, security consultants, corporate investigators, who'll take contracts without asking hard questions about the client. Elliot processed this. The room was warm despite the rain. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender. Whoever Tara's cousin was, she kept her space clean and scented. Ordinary details. An ordinary apartment on an ordinary street in an ordinary neighborhood, and the 2 of them sitting in it talking about state surveillance operations as if it were something they'd trained for their entire lives. Riley hadn't, and he hadn't trained for this specifically. He'd trained for patrol routes in places where the threat was armed, visible, and wearing a different uniform. This was different. This was a threat that wore the same clothes, spoke the same language, and disappeared into the same city he called home. We need to decide what we're doing, he said. Riley looked up from her notebook. Her hazel eyes caught the lamplight. What we're doing? We found a body. We found a cross. We found references to a file that connects to the Romanov succession. We've both been followed by professional surveillance teams within 24 hours. Someone delivered envelopes to our doors at 3 in the morning. A dead man in a museum basement was carrying a note that said they know about the meeting. He leaned forward. At some point, we stop reacting and we start deciding. Are we trying to understand this, or are we trying to survive it? The question was real. He needed to know where she stood, because the 2 objectives were not the same. Understanding required moving toward the source. Survival required moving away from it. Riley closed her notebook, set it on the desk beside the silver cross. You're asking if I want to run. I'm asking what you want. She was quiet for a long time. Rain on the window, a muffled television from the apartment below, someone watching the news. A dog barked twice in the street and stopped. Henrik Rask died in that basement, Riley said. He died holding a note that said File 17 is open. He died because he was going to tell us something. And the people who killed him are now following us through the city we live in, watching the places we work, identifying the people we love. She looked at Tara's spare phone on the desk. They've seen Tara's face. Because of me. Because I went to dinner at a museum and someone followed me there. Her voice was steady, but her hands, resting on her knees, had gone still in a way that wasn't natural. Held still. Controlled. If we run, they follow. We've already proven we can't disappear. They found us in a cafe, a construction site, and a museum within 48 hours. Running doesn't work unless you have somewhere to go that no one knows about. And right now, we don't have that. She paused, picked up the cross from the desk, turned it in her fingers. The silver caught the light. AM 1918. I want to understand this, she said. I want to know what File 17 is. I want to know why Henrik Rask died. I want to know why someone separated us into two different families and gave us two different names and never told us we existed to each other. And I want to know who's following us, and who sent them, and what they think we are. She set the cross down. Then I want to decide for myself what to do about it. Elliot watched her. The set of her jaw, the stillness of her hands, the way she'd laid out her objectives in order of priority, information, comprehension, agency, like someone presenting a risk assessment to a client. Except the client was her own life, and the risk was total. Okay, he said. Okay? We move toward it, carefully. We control what we can, locations, communications, timing, routes. We assume surveillance on our homes, our phones, our regular patterns. We don't return to either apartment until we understand the threat better. We use this place tonight. Tomorrow, we find somewhere else. And after tomorrow? We find out what the northern table is. We find out who's in File 17. We find out what Brasovo means. Riley nodded. Once. A small movement that carried the weight of a decision neither of them could take back. Outside, the rain intensified. It hit the window glass in gusts, driven by a wind that had shifted direction since Elliot arrived. The streetlight beyond the blinds flickered once and held. The building creaked in the way that old Oslo apartments creak. Timber settling, pipes adjusting. The slow respiration of a structure that had stood for more than a century and would stand for another. Two people sat in a borrowed room in Kampen. A silver cross lay on the desk between them. The city spread around them in every direction, full of streets and buildings and lights and people, and somewhere among all of it, men who were looking for them and would not stop. The distance had closed. Now it would close further.
The story continues in the next chapter, so make sure to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video with fellow book lovers.